Alright, YouTube, there are more things right now happening at Fukushima, as usual, link in the description. There is an exhaust tower at the plant that is leaking extremely high levels of radiation right now. I said over 10 sieverts per hour. Now, if someone were to stand next to one of these leaks, which apparently have been caused by some sort of fracture, of course, radioactivity weakens metal. It makes it more brittle. If somebody were to stand very close to that for any length of time, they would kick the bucket. Um, I believe this is the most severe radiation leak. Certainly, since all of that highly radioactive water spilled out of that storage tank, possibly much more radioactivity than that. Of course, that was somewhat of a lower measurement of radioactivity than this. This is a severe risk to anybody in the area. They said they're going to have a press conference on it later. But there's more happening right now too at this plant. The one thing being that Arnie Gunderson and some others are saying that because of the instability of the soil at this site, the entire site could essentially slough off into the ocean. It could literally the ground, because it's so inundated. And you've got to understand the water table isn't far below the soil surface anyway. The entire area could simply start sliding into the ocean, which would be the worst scenario possible. Well, actually, that wouldn't be the worst scenario. Actually, if it goes into the ocean, it's going to contaminate the Pacific and screw it up for years. But at least if it did that, presumably it wouldn't go atmospheric, so it would harm the water, but it wouldn't. There wouldn't be much radioactive ash going up into the atmosphere and thus blanketing the entire northern hemisphere. So actually, it could be a blessing in disguise if that were to happen. Still no word on where the corium is. These three melted blobs of nuclear fuel. Uh, Still not sure. The people at TEPCO swear that the corium is still inside the reactor, essentially has spread out evenly across the floor, making a layer of nuclear material. Others have said that the radiation readings within the reactor and from the water coming out of the reactor make it more likely that they've actually sunk below that level, and that they're somewhere in the ground right now affecting the groundwater. And because of the dishonesty of TEPCO and because of the dishonesty of the people that are managing this situation, not the workers, but the people that are in charge of overseeing the workers, you can't really trust any. I mean, they said you can't trust anything that they're saying. They said, well, we measured this water during the typhoon and it was, not that much more radioactive than rainwater. So we just dumped 1,100 tons or whatever it was into the ocean. Like they were going around in the middle of this tropical storm, individually testing each of these areas that were flooding before they pumped it into the ocean. I think not. Um, the whole situation is just a huge clusterfuck. Nobody has a clue what's going on. They say that they think they know where the coriums are. They don't. Now there's this exhaust tower that's got cracks in it and is releasing extremely high doses of radiation. This is an acute killing dose of radiation. Literally, if you were to stand next to it for a couple minutes, you'd have cancer probably already. This is like demon core level release of radiation. And once again, it's on alternative news, yes. It's ENE News and a few other sites are talking about it. The mainstream media is too focused on this, Navy shipyard shooting or whatever it is. Of course, I would argue that the death toll or the total number of people injured and sickened by the Fukushima plant is already well in excess of any mass shooting event we've had anytime recently. You've got all these kids with thyroid cancer, and the Japanese government says, "Oh no, it's not due to Fukushima. The level just happened to increase, 18 times for no apparent reason whatsoever. It was just faulty statistics." You've got people on the west coast of the United States. You've got these nuclear uh, the monitoring sites are upping the amount that's considered an acceptable dose of radiation. It's just coincidentally after Fukushima happens to, have its first meltdown, which could be the first of many, depending on the situation. It all is completely fishy. And then the city gets the Olympics. Well, Tokyo gets the Olympics, not Fukushima. You have to wonder if someone greased the wheels and paid these people off at the Olympic Committee. Well, here's, we really want to remake the image of nuclear power, so here's $10 million for each of you, give it to Tokyo and we won't have a problem. The whole situation is just spiraling out of control, and as I've said before, it could be that nothing major happens. That, well, something major is happening every day. There's still 300 tons of radioactive water going into the ocean every day. There are still numerous leaks at the site. They still don't know where the corium is, but there hasn't been another meltdown. And it could be that this lower level of problematic happenings will continue to occur for many years or decades, and it will never melt down again. It's quite possible that that will happen. The problem being, it's obvious that the media blackout of these events is due to money and or threats from these nuclear committees, because if people understood the situation, they would understand that that level of nuclear material going into the ocean, there's still radioactive steam coming off of these buildings, is not healthy for the world. Any level of radioactivity through the process of bioaccumulation is going to taint the food supply that's coming out of the Pacific. Even the supposedly low level of fallout that hit the United States, and I would challenge the official estimates of how much fallout hit, is enough so that there is now radioactivity showing up in milk in the Pacific Northwest and in California, because the cows are eating mildly contaminated grass, and through bioaccumulation, the milk produced by those cows is more radioactive than the grass that they're eating. It's bioaccumulation, and it moves up the food chain. This is how we observed problems with DDT. DDT did not affect, small birds. It didn't really do anything to them. The problem is the eagles and the falcons and the hawks, which ate those small birds, were getting an order of magnitude higher a dose, and it was fucking with their eggs, and the populations declined steeply. You are going to see the same thing with this radiation. If the whole world were covered in a low dose of radiation, at first it wouldn't really affect anything. You're not going to see mutated insects. You're not going to see mutated grass or vegetables, most likely, from that low a dose. The problem is the things which eat those vegetables and eat the grass and eat the bugs then get a higher dose, and humans generally eat quite a bit of meat. Most humans do. They're accumulating this radiation even more quickly than the animals that are eating the mildly contaminated vegetation. It's bioaccumulation. It's a relatively elementary process that anyone who took college prep biology should understand this concept. Unfortunately, most people don't seem to understand this concept. They either weren't taught it in science, or they were taught it and forgot it completely, or they're just not familiar with the term in the first place. And that's probably why so many people are ignoring this issue, which is an issue which shouldn't be ignored when you think of the ramifications. Let's assume that there's no further meltdown. Let's assume that it's just all low-level stuff, like, oh, yeah, storage tank broke here. Here's a leak, couple thousand, tons of water leaked into the Pacific, whatever. And of course, 300 tons per day is leaking anyway. Let's assume that that's all that happens. They're looking at a timeline of not stopping this level of leakage into the Pacific Ocean until at least 2015. And that's assuming that everything goes without a hitch, which, as we've seen over the last 2 years of this plant, is hardly what you would expect. I would be more surprised if everything goes off perfectly. The ice wall works fine, and they manage to store all this water and don't have to release anymore, and the groundwater seepage stops or slows down substantially, and there's no further collapses or meltdowns, and nothing major happens. I would be more surprised if that were the case than if it were the case that there was another meltdown, or that the corium, ate through some sand and ended up in the ocean, like literally laying on the surface of the ocean. I would be less surprised to see something like that happen than that this plan that they've got, which is manually removing the fuel rods from the cooling tanks, attempting to cover up the site, creating this ice wall. I would be surprised if these things work fine. I would be this ice wall idea is completely experimental. Yes, they've created walls like this using refrigeration rods before. It's never been attempted with a nuclear plant. They're not sure what to expect. This is a flying fuck at a rolling donut. When you really think about it, it hasn't been tried before. It could fail completely. You know, one of the coriums could slide off of a rock right into the side of this ice wall and burn a hole through it. We're not sure. It could destroy one of the cooling rods that are inserted into the ground, or the ice wall could not take in the first place. Power could end up going out because there's another earthquake and tsunami. And by the way, there was a 5.1 earthquake today, not that far from Fukushima. If it had been a little bit closer or a little bit larger, it probably would have collapsed one of these buildings. The radiation is already eating away at the metal. It's making it brittle. It's making it flake. That's to be expected. The radioactivity in these reactors is extremely high. There are still fuel rods unaccounted for. The corium's unaccounted for. The water is flowing into the ocean. TEPCO has repeatedly underestimated the radioactivity of almost every event at this plant, either because they don't have the right equipment or because they're just lying to people. You've got disinformation coming out. Well, don't worry, it'll dilute. It's perfectly fine. You know, you can dump 100,000 tons of this water into the Pacific. It's not going to do anything, which is a load of bullcrap because of bioaccumulation. Again, yes, you can swim in it and you won't have a problem. You eat a bunch of fish from it, you do have a problem. Oh, I got leukemia. My kid got leukemia. My daughter got leukemia. My wife got leukemia. I'm sure it wasn't tied to the fact that we're drinking strontium, but never mind that. I'm sure the government would never lie. I'm sure TEPCO would never lie, even though they have, straight to our faces. And this is not just, and here's the big thing. A lot of people act like this is a localized Japanese event. And like Japan is the only country that has a say in what goes on. TEPCO is the only company that has a say in what goes on. That it's their problem, we should stay out of it. And people in the West who are talking about this issue are either being alarmist or being fruity. That's not true, because if there's a further meltdown, that ash will hit the United States, it will hit Canada and Mexico, it will hit Central America and South America, it may go further than that. Hawaii gets hit, Australia, Indonesia, the Philippines, all of these areas presumably get hit with at least some fallout. Therefore, it is the responsibility and the right of people in all of these nations to talk about this issue. And our media should be doing a better job of reporting on this event, or these events, I should say, because every day there seems to be something else fishy happening there. If they've got a lid on the situation, you'd think it'd be more like 3 Mile Island. We're in 3 Mile Island. You had a partial nuclear meltdown. There were problems, but more or less they took care of the issue. After a great deal for the first few weeks of jostling, they generally took care of the issue, and it was determined that it was not nearly as big a disaster as it certainly could have been. With Fukushima, you seem to have this bizarre situation where they'd simply rather not talk about it. And when they do talk about it, they're lying. Like it's no big deal. There's more nuclear material at Fukushima than Chernobyl by far. There's 10 times more fissile material than there was at Chernobyl. And we look at Chernobyl in retrospect and we say that was a terrible event. Radiation everywhere, people with birth defects, people with cancer. A large area of arable land was contaminated and still is, by the way. You've got this sarcophagus that's falling apart, and the elephant's foot, it's still it's the most radioactive man-made object on Earth, or partially man-made object on Earth. My God, it's just terrible. But we look at Fukushima, which is arguably already a worse situation, and an even less well-handled situation, and the media doesn't talk about it. On the anniversary of Chernobyl, you see all sorts of stories dedicated to what went wrong, what could have been done better. The aftermath of Chernobyl, birth defects, X times higher. And we get this from the media, the mainstream media too. You see it on CNN and Fox and all of these other sites on the anniversary of Chernobyl. They talk about it. Fukushima, on the anniversary of Fukushima, what do you see? One little op-ed that says, don't worry, folks, it's being diluted by the ocean. And that's all you see. And again, someone pointed out to me, well, Greenpeace has run a bunch of stories on Fukushima. Yeah, but where are they in the media? What, Greenpeace puts them on their site and expects that to do anything? They should be talking to the media. If this is such an extremely important issue with so much radiation entering the ocean, you'd think they'd raise a little bit more of a fuss. But these environmentalist groups have a stiffy for nuclear power. They still think it's clean. They still think it's safe. It's not. Look up list of nuclear incidents in the United States and you'll see dozens and dozens of situations where there have already been leaks, explosions, cores accidentally went critical, people were exposed to life-threatening levels of radiation, people died. And that's just the United States. Look at all the incidents in Japan. There have been incidences in France, Russia, all over the world. And nobody's talking about this. Fukushima is already either number one or at the least number two behind Chernobyl, a major event. It hit level 7. There have been several level 3 incidences since then, and nobody's saying a word. It makes no sense. You have to wonder if the American media just talks about Chernobyl because, oh, it was in Russia and they were our enemies at the time, so let's make big of that. But 3 Mile Island and Fukushima, oh, those don't matter because X, Y, and Z. It's ridiculous. It's good. People are ignoring it. Syria has gone out of the news. As soon as Syria went out, this naval shipyard bullshit went in, and everyone's all hyper-partisan about that. Well, was he... the Republican sites say, well, he was an Obama fan. Haha, I guess this just proves how violent they are. And the left-wing sites talk about, oh, this is why we need more gun control, and we should ban the AR-15 and all these other guns. And it's just a melting pot of bullshit. All it is nonsense. It doesn't matter. The shooting's already over. The shooter's dead. The issue can be let rest. There's something more sinister boiling away in the waters of Japan right now that nobody's talking about. They're completely delusional if they don't understand that this could turn into a much worse event at any given time. All it takes is an earthquake. All it takes is one more big earthquake and that site is gone. All that nuclear fuel goes right into the atmosphere and right into the ocean, and a good third of Japan becomes uninhabitable, from Tokyo all the way up to the northern islands. It would be devastating, and people don't want to talk about it. It's just complete lunacy how people are ignoring this issue, and then they turn around and they dare to call somebody who's actually talking about it alarmist, when you've got nuclear experts, people like Gunderson, who are trying to raise awareness of this issue, people who are respected in this community, in the nuclear community, or in at least among the nuclear watchdog community. You've got respected individuals who have been trained in nuclear engineering saying this is a big problem, and everyone is completely ignoring them. It makes no sense. But people have a death wish on this planet, I think. At this point, a lot of people just want the apocalypse to come. And if it comes in the form of a giant cloud of radiation that, everyone and their mother gets cancer, well, then I guess so be it. Well, that'll only show the stupidity of mankind for ignoring the issue for so long and not doing something about it. It almost seems like TEPCO understands at this point it's been so long since their response in the first place that there's no longer anything they can do, and that's the truly scary part.